Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Does Your Block Need a SOC? So before I hand it off to our presenters, there are a few housekeeping items I want to go over. So just so you know, you can maximize or minimize the webinar pane during the presentation by using the red and orange arrow buttons. And during the webinar, we definitely encourage you to ask questions. And in that same webinar pane, you'll see a questions box where you can type in your question and click submit. And our presenters will be answering those throughout our presentation and at the end as time allows. And then I definitely want to make sure everyone has good audio. So if you are on your phone, make sure you select the phone call audio option. And if you're on your computer, make sure you select the computer audio option. And if you're here today for CPE credit, just a few reminders. You need to be on your own personal computer, no smartphones, logged in using your own unique URL. You have to be logged into our online software for at least 50 consecutive minutes. And then you need to actively respond to at least 75% of the polling questions. Today we have 4 polling questions, so make sure you answer at least 3. And please make sure you complete the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. And today's learning objectives are review basics of SOC reporting and third-party attestation. Recall how third-party assurance applies to current blockchain and cryptocurrency projects, exchanges, custodians, and brokers. Identify specific risks and how current reporting frameworks and standards can be used to reduce risks. And with that, I'll pass it off.
All right, thanks, Marie. This is Andres. I am the partner in charge of our blockchain practice. I've been at Menino for a number of years, was a partner in our consulting practice. I was running our outsourcing group in the past few years, and then really went down the crypto rabbit hole, and I guess I never quite came out. And so I was fortunate enough to join what was already a handful of people in the firm that were super crypto focused, and Noah was one of them. And so Noah is my co-presenter today. Noah is actually an attorney by training, but has spent the last 10 years in a variety of audit, legal, and regulatory compliance roles. And he works with some of our virtual or digital currency exchange clients, some of our Bitcoin ATM clients, some of our broker-dealer clients, as well as a large number of crypto projects. And it's pretty cool because Noah really understands blockchains and crypto, but has a tremendous background in security compliance, third-party assurance, SOC, our topic du jour, and cybersecurity as well. And that's kind of a unique skill set. And we're pretty excited about that because there's not a lot of consulting organizations in this space who really bring both sides of that equation to our clients. And so we think it's a little bit under-investigated at this point, underexplored, and that's okay because, you know, it's a new space and everyone's trying to figure out sort of what the next product is or next milestone on the roadmap, and compliance is not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind. But as you see this space mature, what we've seen over the last few quarters is that more and more companies are asking us about this stuff. They're asking us about, hey, how do we set up an environment and have a third-party organization like Menino test that environment that can sort of withstand a lot of the compliance and controls checks. So let me maybe, before we jump into the topic, give you just a little bit of an overview as well on what our blockchain practice does. All right, there we go. So we can kind of click through until we see the whole slide. But there's a few different things that we do, and really what got us going in this space, I wish I could say we were really visionary and 5 or 10 years ago we saw what was coming, but unfortunately it was more, we kind of got lucky and we were in the right place and the right time. Menino has a lot of startup clients, and we do work all day long with venture-backed startups. And so we ended up working at this tiny little exchange startup called Coinbase back in, I want to say, 2014, 2015-ish, and took them on as a client, and took on Ripple and Shapeshift, and more recently Brave and Kraken, a number of really super good projects, and just really high profile people in this industry. And that's kind of ultimately what really opened our eyes and got us to understand the potential of what this space really entails. So we've been very active. We've done quite a bit of work over the years. And maybe the middle of this slide here, these are kind of the traditional services that you probably associate a firm like Armanino with. And so ultimately, we want to be the best in all these services in helping our crypto and blockchain clients. And I would say for a lot of these, we really have unique solutions. And you probably notice that when you go on our website and you see the amount of white papers we have, the amount of documentation. We're adding webinars almost weekly now. We were kind of joking with Noah that he should really have a permanent seat in our webinar room here, because we're just doing so many webinars right now. But so that's been really fun, trying to figure out, okay, what are the unique audit requirements of our crypto clients? What are the unique tax issues they run into? What are some of the risk assurance and advisory issues, and some of the consulting issues? And then more specifically, right now, we're hyper-focused on a few different high-level topics or themes within the crypto industry. So stablecoins is one of them. We're spending quite a bit of time on tokenization, whether it's tokenization of securities, tokenization of real estate, tokenization of future cash flows. That's something that we're pretty bullish about and really focused on. Smart contracts, sort of the logical extension of stablecoins and tokenization. And then more specifically on the accounting side, we've spent quite a bit of time evaluating and looking at what are the different crypto accounting solutions out there. So there's another webinar on that if you're interested, you can follow. And then, of course, there's the enterprise side of the equation. So we work with a lot of companies that really don't have any crypto or blockchain background. Maybe they don't really understand what it means to them. So we call them kind of crypto curious. And so when they're crypto curious, they want to learn, what does this mean? Is there some kind of proof of concept we can realize together? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. And ultimately, let's see if we can get that through a design process, an implementation process. And then obviously we need to do some level of security monitoring and reviewing. But there could also be just a general crypto on-ramp for retailers, e-commerce businesses, a lot of our esports clients interested in that. So just getting companies ready to accept payment, make payment in crypto is kind of a simple way to think of that. So there's quite a bit of different things that we're doing. But again, the topic of today is really in that risk assurance and advisory category. And it's one that for many companies, it wasn't the first thing they thought about on their game plan for the year, but we think that it can really add value in this space.
Awesome, thank you, Andres. So just a little bit more background on myself. I've helped build our risk assurance and advisory practice here at Armanino, and a lot of that was working in SOC and third-party assurance. So I've been involved, over the past 3.5 years in about 900 of these issuances. So I've, like Andre said, I've got the SOC report experience. I've also had this really interesting thing that I got drawn into, right, working for a virtual currency exchange. In early days, there was a lot of things to figure out there. And so we've gained a lot of expertise. We've developed unique processes and procedures and even technological tools to actually perform those audits. And Armanino was actually the first, to my knowledge, and we've searched pretty far and wide, but first to actually issue a SOC 2 over a blockchain company, over a blockchain product. So we think that that's a little unique badge of honor there too. So and now I'm working on the AI CPA's working group and actually developing the standards for other auditors, service auditors, and how are they going to approach risks that are attendant in these blockchain, whether public or private blockchain environments. So I'm having a lot of fun in this space. I'm lucky enough to do this every day now, so I'm a little bit removed from SOC reporting on the day-to-day basis and focusing on all this fun stuff we're doing on the blockchain side. With that said, before we sort of jump in, I also just want to invite everybody on the call, please jump in with questions. You know, one of the things I hate most is hearing myself talk at length. So I also want to respond to the questions that you have as they come up. I think if you have a question, it's probably likely somebody else has the same question. So I really invite that. So let's jump in. Let's talk just generally about the rise of outsourcing and how that has essentially proportionally increased the need for third-party assurance and SOC reporting. I think that all of you, on this call you can immediately look at the organization that you work for and see all of the third-party applications that you use, all of the cloud-hosted systems, everything from HR to CRM to payment processing, infrastructure hosting. These are all functions that traditionally the organization itself would manage, and now they've been outsourced to third parties. Without outsourcing, it really has been essentially a one-for-one, you could say, rise in the need for third-party assurance. And one of the standards that immediately filled that role many, many years ago was the original standard for SOC, Service Organization Controls Reporting, and that was under a SAS 70 standard. So that's probably an audit standard that you guys have heard. Show me your SAS 70. Do they have a SAS 70 in place? And that standard, again, promulgated or issued by the AICPA, is an attest reporting framework, and it's evolved over the years. So it's not called the SAS 70 anymore. There's actually two distinct standards that we'll get into, SOC 1 and SOC 2. But really, the changes that are made are to keep pace with technological change, but also to address new areas of risk that come up in these outsourced arrangements. So now we get to sort of the intersection of this landscape of third-party attest and also the rise of blockchain technology. And I think this is an incredibly interesting topic because, well, blockchain simply has the potential to change the way people and organizations trust and transact. We've already started to see some of that change. And, I think that really it's going to be sweeping over the next couple of years.
I got a question. This might be a silly question, but whenever I think of SOC, I think of what I put on my feet. And, I got one sock on one foot and I'm wearing socks. And so in my mind, socks is just the plural of a sock. But whenever you talk about SOC reports and then you'll talk about SOX reports, these are different things. And so I thought maybe it'd be good before we really jump into SOC to sort of explain why SOX is not just two SOC reports.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, that's a good foundational thing to just cover right at the outset because it is a confusing thing for a lot of people. So Service Organization Controls, SOC, SOC, yeah, again, standard issued by the AICPA. It's a reporting framework that private and public companies can use to demonstrate and give transparency to their internal control environment. SOX, SOX, short for Sarbanes-Oxley, is a public company reporting framework, and it really comes from the rise of Enron and public company regulation that probably a lot of you know about. And so SOX is essentially a standard as well, but the other thing that you hear with SOX is COSO 2013, and now there's actually a new version of COSO, but that's the reporting framework or the set of standards. And we'll get into that a little bit later because actually these two frameworks have been aligned in some regards. So
you got to come up with some better names for these things in the future.
Set them apart a little bit more, right? Or something more exciting anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is about the most exciting SOC presentation you'll ever see because it involves blockchain. So here we go. Yeah, I mean, with any new technology, there's really a lot of questions. I think that blockchain technology presents a paradigm shift, not for all industries necessarily, but it certainly is going to make us think about, make suppliers, contractors, customers think about the way we process, the way we trust, what the systems of record are, what are the legal structures, enforcement. Obviously, privacy has been a big topic in the news and in compliance departments these days, and so blockchain and privacy, there's a crossover there as well. So interesting topic for us, but also for Armanino, because this is a place where we are ahead, and we can really make a big impact on our clients as well as the larger ecosystem. So with that said, let's jump in, and just here's the agenda today. We'll cover a landscape, and really this is the blockchain technology landscape. We'll cover some terms and foundational concepts for both SOC and blockchain, get us all aligned before we go a layer deeper. And then we'll first cover an overview of SOC reporting, and we'll go pretty deep. It's not you're meant to have a takeaway here, a good technical understanding of SOC reporting, but we also need to layer in an overview of blockchain and how that applies as well. So we'll do both. We'll talk about some of the players in the current blockchain ecosystem or crypto ecosystems, and how these third-party assurance mechanisms might apply. And then we'll get into a few use case examples. We'll actually talk about virtual currency exchanges or digital currency exchanges. We'll talk about asset tokenization, and we'll talk about a private blockchain example of supply chain and how SOC might apply. And then we'll talk about some unique risk considerations. So hopefully we can get there. There's a lot to cover.
You know what? Another question. Who is a typical buyer today? So you mentioned outsourcing, and so I imagine, coming out of the outsourced accounting world, outsourced accounting shops would buy this type of product today. But who are some of the traditional buyers of this solutions, like HR companies as well, or SaaS in general?
Absolutely, yeah. It's really service organizations, which is kind of just a terminology, but yeah, it's payroll companies and outsourced benefit management companies. Absolutely, almost all of those major players provide SOC reporting. The infrastructure as a service provider, so these are your cloud hosting companies. They take on a lot of responsibility, of course, to maintain an organization's IT infrastructure. Managed service providers, same thing, right? They're providing a managed service for IT, perhaps maintaining the operating systems on those servers, right? Those types of companies, as well as payment processors, CRM companies.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep, SaaS in general. So if you're putting your client or your customer data in a cloud hosted solution, you should, from a vendor risk management perspective, you should be asking, what are the controls like at that organization? And the most common way in the marketplace to ask that question and get a good response or a standard response is to ask, do they have a SOC 1 or SOC 2 in place? All right, so let's go through a little bit of the timeline here. So 2009, the Bitcoin white paper was released, and this is removing all the technical parts of Bitcoin. This is really just a peer-to-peer digital cash system. Lots of computer science that goes into the back end of it, but essentially this network was proposed and actually launched in 2009. 2010, we have the first actual purchase of goods, as well as the first trading on exchanges. And then really a long time before anybody outside of the really, computer scientist sort of community and engineering community was actually dealing in Bitcoin or using it. In 2013, we had the first ICO to actually raise funds on a blockchain platform. Interesting side story, we got to work with the father of the ICO, we call him. I don't think he wants to be called that because he laughed when we said that, but that was a really interesting experience. He's a client of ours, and
he did the first ICO, right?
Exactly, yeah. He came up with the idea and did the first ICO. So 2014 to 2017 was, really interesting year. If you're just looking at cryptocurrency prices, obviously they fluctuated, and then in 2017 took a massive jump, exponential rise to Bitcoin being priced at 20,000 at the top of the market. But also this was a time where cryptocurrency and blockchain projects generally were growing, and also, a lot of development on private blockchains was happening. So we'll get into the distinction of what those are exactly. 2018 was a pretty crazy year for these initial coin offerings, and these projects, 1,258 of them, by my count, raised about $7.8 billion in sum. So those are pretty staggering numbers. It was a lot to keep up with in 2018, that's for sure. So 2019, we're already seeing the rise of stable coins, stable cryptocurrencies that are pegged and don't fluctuate wildly. And we're also seeing the rise of these enterprise use cases and actually seeing the real application of blockchain technology to solve problems other than, money transfer or borderless money transfer. So a future look, I think, 2020 is tokenization takes further hold, and we're talking about asset tokenization, whether that's income producing real estate or private company ownership, things like that. We're going to see that take hold, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. 2021 and beyond, I think we see, meaningful or additional consumer adoption. I think the barriers to entry are going to go down technologically. These cryptocurrencies will be easier to get into, easier to trade, more trustworthy as these centralized exchanges become more trustworthy. But ultimately, I think the need for assurance is really still there, and we'll get into why.
Yeah, we're pretty bullish on the kind of broader money use case, and so I would extend money with just assets in general, maybe even liabilities at some point. There's some projects out there, pretty cool projects that are looking at tokenized debt. But I wrote an article on that maybe 2 weeks ago that a lot of our clients picked up, and a lot of people seem to really appreciate, where I tried to walk people through my thinking on how blockchains and cryptocurrencies, and I would extend cryptocurrencies with tokens in general, are hard to split up from each other. It's hard to think of blockchain technology without capturing the value of whether it's an asset, whether it's money, in a direct way in that blockchain. And so we're a little less focused on some of the enterprise use cases out there that might be more supply chain oriented, for example, and that might change. But right now, it just seems like there's a lot of real value in that broader money use case. And I think that gets us to our first polling question, right?
Yes, so we definitely want to know why you decided to attend our webinar. So is it because you don't know anything about SOC or blockchain and you're here to learn? Maybe it's that you don't understand blockchain, or that you do understand blockchain and maybe you want to know how SOC can apply. Maybe you work in the blockchain crypto asset space and you need a third-party solution, or maybe you're here to sell your Bitcoin. So let us know what that looks like. We'll give you a few more seconds to answer, and then we'll close the polls. Someone's here to sell blockchain.
Someone's trying to shill their Bitcoin now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it went up by 15% last night. Kind of crazy. Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from this is that maybe this wasn't meant to be an introduction to blockchain, but that it might be worthwhile to slow down just slightly and make sure that we're clear about some of the concepts, because we've got some people on the call who a good percentage say not familiar necessarily with either. So let's get into some of those foundational concepts. And we're doing blockchains first. Okay. So we've already mentioned this in passing, but there are, you're going to hear people say the blockchain changes everything, right? But what we're really talking about is the difference between public and private blockchains. So the Bitcoin network, probably the most recognizable cryptocurrency name, and definitely the highest market capitalized, is a public blockchain network. And Bitcoin is the cryptocurrency that runs on that public blockchain. So there are many hundreds now of public blockchains, and there are even thousands then of tokens or currencies built on top of those blockchains. So a good example is to go one step down from Bitcoin to Ethereum, which is the second highest market capitalized blockchain, public blockchain. And on that blockchain, there's thousands of cryptocurrencies. This is where a lot of the ICO activity happened, where a project would, stand up a new solution. We're going to solve a problem. Here's our token to solve the problem, and people bought in. So distinguishing that from private blockchains, which are essentially the use of the same technology, but in most cases to solve a business problem, and they are limited to certain members. So this could be one organization implements a blockchain solution. That usually isn't the best use case. So oftentimes this is multiple organizations that join a consortium, and they will solve a problem. Again, supply chain being a great example of where multiple players maybe pass something through production. And so tracking that efficiently and in an immutable way would be a great use of a private blockchain. I've already kind of covered this, but basically there's tokens and decentralized apps, and they're built on top of a given public blockchain network. So these are the other terms that you see in the private blockchain space. They're permissioned or federated blockchains. And again, they're limited, they're access limited. Not anybody can stand up a node, not anybody can mine or participate in the network or transact on that blockchain network. They're limited to certain players. So blockchain 101 here is really just what are blockchains? They are distributed ledgers. So they're an Excel sheet or a database that in a public blockchain, everybody, any participant in the network can share, and they're secured by a consensus mechanism. So they're really not all new technology. They're a combination of existing technologies. So they're the combination of distributed networking, which is the same technology that allowed for Napster and still allows for file sharing and peer-to-peer sharing. And they're the combination of that with cryptography, which is, again, not a new technology, but the combination is a new product.
Yeah, this was really one of the key breakthroughs, I think, in this technology that, we used to rely on one single trusted third party, one source of the truth. And a lot of times that's the best way to do things. It's pretty efficient. It allows you to scale fairly quickly. But it's pretty cool to be able to transact directly with your counterparty in a way that we don't need that trusted third party to review or facilitate that transaction. And at its core, that's really what blockchains enable. And the way that they do that, and this is usually kind of the aha moment when we talk to clients about this, say the way that we do it is instead of one party having the ledger, what if we all have a copy of the ledger? Which, it sounds kind of crazy, but it actually works really well in enabling trust. It doesn't work well in that it's not the most fast, efficient, doesn't create the highest throughput. But in situations where that's secondary and trust is your key priority, your primary objective, well, then blockchains are awesome.
Smart contracts is another, as we're going through the buzzword bingo here that you guys have probably heard. And really, they're not contracts at all. They are just computer programs. So think of them like web applications that run on this, Web 3.0 of a blockchain network. And they're just if, then, else statements. So if a certain event occurs, then an action is taken, or else if that event doesn't occur, no action is taken. And they can get more complicated than that, but that's really the simple way to think of them is they're just programs that run on a blockchain network.
One thing that people sometimes ask me, Noah, is when I'm sending something over a blockchain, how is it different from when I send somebody something over email? And I forget who told me this. I stole it from somebody else, but basically, when you send something through email, like when I send a picture to Noah, what's happening behind the scenes is really my computer takes a copy of that picture and sends a copy of that picture through email to him, and I still have the original. It's very different when I send something through a blockchain. If I send some kind of coin to Noah over a blockchain, I don't have the original anymore. It's gone. It's now sitting with him, and that's a fundamental distinction in anything that we have used to transmit data or files or any kind of data sharing solution that we've leveraged in the past. Blockchains are pretty different in that way.
Yep, we're going to start talking about some of the players in the ecosystem here. And I think the main takeaway is that, early days of blockchain and crypto, people were saying this is the new peer-to-peer, trustless, disintermediated, no big banks involved. This is the way, this is the future where we don't need third-party assurance because the protocol and the cryptography itself is the assurance. And it's just simply not true because again, some of these players that we'll see, the way that they operate is more in a centralized fashion. It could be, more akin to some of the traditional organizations that we're used to dealing with, like central banks or big banks. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But the need for third-party assurance is not eliminated simply because the solution is a blockchain solution. All right, so let's talk about some of the foundational concepts in SOC reporting. So these are attestations. They are issued by certified public accountants, and therefore you can expect, if you're, say, on the other side of this audit, or your organization is going through one, you can expect audit standards to be applied. And that's the what you might expect, the methodologies and procedures that would be applied to any type of audit, maybe a financial statement audit as well. So SOC is a reporting framework, not a security framework. You could write a whole dissertation on this, but it's just kind of important to know that essentially what this means, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say thou shalt, configure your environment in exactly this way. Rather, it's a flexible set of objectives or criteria. Those are two important words. In SOC 1, we use objectives. In SOC 2, we use criteria. We'll come back to that. But again, it doesn't tell the organization what to do. It says, here's the objective to be met. What has management done to address that risk to meet that control objective or that control criteria? So you'll often hear, are you SOC certified? Is the organization SOC certified? SOC is not a certification. There is a seal that the AICPA allows organizations who have gone through a SOC audit to place on their website and on their marketing collateral and things like that. It's not a certification, however. There's a lot of terms, again, buzzword bingo in blockchain and in third-party assurance. So you'll hear SSAE 16, SSAE 18. Those are the same standard. Actually, the SSAE 18 is effective as of May 25th, 2017, I believe it is. And SAS 70 is the predecessor standard. So these are all roughly synonymous terms here, and they're often misapplied. If I'm being honest, people throw these around and use them in the wrong way very often in the marketplace. If someone's asking you for an SSAE 18 report, they're probably asking you for a SOC report, but they need to be clear about whether it's a SOC 1 or a SOC 2. And we're going to help you understand what the differences between those two really are today. All right, and the other thing to mention here is that most companies, the vast majority of them who are on a SOC audit cycle, it is a cycle. It's an annual cadence. It's not a one-time exercise. And that's what customers will look for as well. They'll look for a history of SOC reporting. They'll look for a history of consistent issuance around the same time of year. There's lots of ways to read between the lines. If you're assessing a vendor, for instance, and they show you, that their original SOC report was a type 1, and then they went into a type 2 period and then back to a type 1, there's some red flags there. Or if they're issuing at different times of year, it may be because they weren't able to, they weren't able to get through the audit at the right time of the year and needed to kick out the compliance period. I've said type 1 and type 2, which might be kind of confusing, so I'll come back to that in the coming slides.
I'm trying to think of an analogy with daily life, and the best one that I'm coming up with is if I go to a restaurant, I don't necessarily need to have some kind of certificate that if I'm ordering some kind of salad, that all of the ingredients in the exact proportions that they should go in that salad or going into that salad. That's less important to me. But what is important is that somebody might have reviewed that the kitchen is, applies a certain level of hygiene, and the produce is fresh. Would that be kind of a good way to think of this? Like where the guys are coming in and looking at the kitchen, but we're not necessarily there to say, yeah, every salad is 20% lettuce and 30% tomatoes. Is that kind of a good way to think of it?
I like that. Yeah, we're like
Yeah.
the health department, preventing E. coli, and I think that's right. In the health department context and food security, right, you're actually talking about state laws and standards that are required. It is worth noting that, right, SOC as a reporting framework is an audit standard that companies can choose to be assessed against. It's not a law, not a legal requirement, but it is a requirement insofar as customers demand it.
So maybe it's more like like restaurants will have requirements on the Department of, I don't know, sanitation or whatever will verify that things are meeting certain hygienic requirements. But then there's also, like stars that they get on, certain, Yelp is maybe not a great example, but
that's what came to mind.
Yeah. Maybe it's something in between there. Anyway, I guess people have answered to our next polling question in the meanwhile. So let's look at the responses. All right.
Very high level of assurance. All right. So,
what was the right answer here?
It's really, D is the correct answer. And if you answered A or B, you're on the right track. It's true that they are self-auditing in some ways. And I think the interesting context to provide here is just that you can imagine if you transact, say it's just this transaction of value, right? You're sending Bitcoin to somebody in exchange for a good or a service. What happens in terms of the transfer of that value from you to the counterparty, that's recorded on the blockchain. That transaction itself is self-audited, but the good or the service that they give back to you off the blockchain is not. And so that's opens up a huge window of where third-party assurance, for instance, is very important. So, all right. So jumping into SOC. So I like to just break this down very quickly to begin with to say, when we're trying to remember the difference between a SOC 1 report and a SOC 2 report, we're really talking about money, cha-ching versus security. Okay. So, and we'll get into the technical of what that means, but really, SOC 1 is, it's relevant to your customer's financial reporting. It's the controls that you put in place at your organization to ensure that the reporting that you give, and it's going to be financial reporting, is complete and accurate. So payroll is a very simple example that we can all relate to. Our outsourced payroll provider, they have to have controls in place to do a lot of things to ensure that payroll account is correct. That's not only calculating the time, but it's calculating the taxes, state, local, and federal correctly. It's then remitting those taxes on a timely basis and tracking all of that. Not to mention healthcare benefits and contributions to IRAs and things like that. So that's a simple example that we can all relate to.
So in the blockchain space, it's probably exchanges, custodians, broker dealers.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly right. Yep. And these things are not mutually exclusive. So there are many organizations that issue SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports. And again, that payroll example is probably a simple example of where both reports apply, because not only does the payroll company have to have controls in place to make sure that all the reporting is complete and accurate, but they also maintain IT systems, and they hold confidential data, they hold private data, and the integrity and processing of that data becomes very important. So it's a case where a SOC 2 is also at play. So a SOC 2 report, again, in shorthand, I think of it as security, but really there's 5 principles. These are called the trust service principles, and they are the security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and or privacy. And this is kind of like Andres' example, where you go to the restaurant and you walk up to the buffet. If you're a buyer for a SOC report, this is essentially an a la carte menu. To get access to the buffet, you have to have the security principle. That is the baseline. Every SOC report is security at minimum. And then a la carte, depending on your your needs, depending on your industry and the nature of your business and your operations, you can add these other principles on top.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another report, SOC 3, and it's really just a public distribution version of a SOC 2. Because both SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports are limited distribution reports, they can only be shared with certain intended users. And that's really most of the people that you would want to share this report with. But it's your customers, auditors, customers auditors, and regulators. Really, these reports, SOC 2 specifically, are heavily used for business development. So a lot of startup companies will use these to demonstrate, security compliance. At the outset, they'll use it to jump vendor management hurdles and things like that. And they are a good mechanism to do that. So the technical language behind what a SOC report is again, it's a service auditor's opinion, and it represents the accuracy and completeness of management's description of their own product or system, the suitability of the design of the controls they've implemented, and also the operating effectiveness of controls. So there's two concepts that are important here, and that's really type 1 versus type 2. This gets confused all the time. So you can have a SOC 1 type 1 and 2, and a SOC 2 type 1 and 2. And the type 1 is that first piece. It's the design of the controls. It's a point-in-time report, and it just says, as of this point in time, the auditor believes that the controls placed into operation are suitably designed. Yes, those are the right controls to meet the risks that the auditor sees and that management sees in that environment. The type 2 report covers a period of time, and it actually goes into the operating effectiveness of controls. And that's where you get these audit procedures, including sampling, right? Because the auditor has to actually look over time, did the change management controls, for instance, operate effectively? Were all the changes approved before they were pushed to production, for instance? So overall, SOC reports are a really key mechanism. They are widely used and heavily relied on by customers and auditors in the marketplace.
I know we got some use cases in the back of the presentation here, but who are within the cryptocurrency and blockchain some of the buyers of SOC 1 and SOC 2? So we already mentioned for SOC 1 could be exchanges, custodians, broker-dealers, maybe issuance platforms for tokens. Who would buy SOC 2 or benefit from a SOC 2?
Yeah, you nailed it. And
same group?
Essentially the same group.
Yeah.
Custodians for sure. And exchanges, we're starting to see that now. Gemini has announced that they've obtained a SOC 2 type 1 report. As well as some of these applications. So
utility token issuers, you mean? Or?
No, I mean more like back office applications. So
okay.
Some of the organizations that we work with
on the accounting
are
side.
Accounting and tax solutions. And so they're ingesting confidential data of an organization. And so as well as maintaining this sort of outsourced IT or cloud hosted application. And so all of these security, availability, confidentiality concerns come into play, for sure. That's a good question. I'm just going to spend a minute here giving you the preview of what else is out there. So we've talked about SOC 1 and SOC 2. There's also this public distribution version of a SOC 2 report, and this allows an organization to put this on a public distribution website. And there's additional standards that the AICPA supports. So one of them is that same SOC 2 standard and principles that we've been talking about, plus some additional subject matter. I think this is going to be an interesting area because this really could apply very well to certain blockchain use cases where, we'd be mapping to maybe a security standard that is specific to blockchain or crypto, right? Maybe it's a cold storage protocol or the CCSS is a crypto security standard it's in its infancy right now, but that's a great example of how the SOC 2 standard might be supplemented with things that are crypto or blockchain specific. SOC 2 for cybersecurity is a recent addition to the SOC portfolio, and and I think very relevant for certain players, exchanges, for instance, custodians, those that are charged with custodianship of cryptocurrency for sure would be, you would think cybersecurity would be top of mind. I think it is. And then SOC for vendor supply chains, actually not released yet, but this will be a way to cover all of the controls that are unique in the supply chain environments. So what role do SOC reports really play in the marketplace? And I think it's many. So I think we all get the takeaway that there's a trust and transparency component here, but it's also, demonstrating compliance posture and image, helping with business development. I think that relates to, differentiation and in some cases a competitive advantage. I know that, I've worked with many customers who have new technology and they will be the first, like a lot like the SOC for the blockchain company that we issued. They were the first to do that, and that was a competitive advantage for them. So reducing security questionnaires or vendor risk questionnaires is another big value of SOC reporting. And overall reduction of cost for other compliance projects or partner audits, customer audits, things like that. I think most importantly, and the part that's been most rewarding for me personally, actually working with these types of organizations, is really that you get to provide some value to the organization. You get to tell them how they stack up against their competitors or other organizations in that same industry. You get to provide them information on best practices and, really helping them identify new risks within their business or emerging risks and help them deal with it. I think, if any of you are on the side where you're a SOC buyer, you should really look for that and ask questions about, not what does my SOC report look like, in the first year, but what does it look like in year 2 and 3? And is my auditor willing to be a partner, right? Are they willing to actually help me? Because quite frankly, pulling back the curtain, it's a lot of auditors are really, they're really hesitant to give advice because they have an independence requirement. They must be independent from management. That really does not mean that we can't provide our clients great advice. We can't tell them what, controls they or categories of controls they probably should have in place, that we can't help them identify new risks or tell them how they stack up. So, or help them keep up to date with these standards as they change and help them keep abreast of these changes. So that's really what you should be looking for in a long-term auditor, again, if you're sort of on the buyer side.
So it's sort of a stamp of approval from an independent third party. That could be cool because your customers might appreciate that, especially I would say if they're not necessarily blockchain or crypto native and they don't necessarily understand all the components to how the technology works. But you're saying the real value for the management team is not just that stamp of approval. It's we're going to actually go through this process together. We're going to partner. We're going to review things together. And hopefully there's going to be real learning, real insights that you're going to be able to walk away with.
Yeah, I think that's true. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And also that not all SOC reports are created equal. It is an AICPA standard and they should all be created equal, but each firm has its own methodology, different sizes and experience of their teams, and how they apply those procedures and how they give advice after the audit and how they consolidate points of improvement are all really important. And you should kind of, again, if you're on the buyer side, if this is something you're thinking about, those are questions you want to ask and kind of dig into. What does this look like? Again, not just first time around, but in the years after as well. All right, so peeling the onion back one more layer, let's just talk about what makes up a SOC 1 report. Okay, so we know now that it's a report on internal controls relevant to financial reporting. Well, how do we get there? Essentially, it's 2 big buckets. So we've got business process controls and IT general controls. And here's just an example of control categories or control objectives. One interesting point with SOC 1 is that you don't have a set criteria like you do in SOC 2. So in SOC 2, you've got this security principle, and within security, there's a number of criteria. There's 7 main categories of criteria that need to be met. And so it's relatively clear to an organization, okay, here I need to put controls in place to meet those specified criteria. In SOC 1, it's kind of open fields. Basically, management has to come up with the control objectives. I'm going, sort of on the same point here, but this is another really important point. If you're working with an auditor, are they willing to tell you or work with you on what those control objectives should be? They certainly should. There's a lot of auditors that would say, no, that's all management, that's their domain. But this is really important space where the auditor needs to help you at least identify, what are the control objectives that they would expect to see, right? And then management obviously owns them. So I won't read these to you because we're getting very short on time. So these are essentially the two big buckets. So let's move to a polling question and do that one real quick.
So which of the statements below is true? So is it SOC 2 is essentially a cybersecurity certification? Type 1 reports are for financial institutions. SOC 2 is a set of criteria, meaning management must implement controls to address risks specific to their operations and to meet the SOC 2 criteria, or SOC stands for service organization controls.
So this is a question where we find out how many attendees we've lost over the course of the webinar. And hey, don't be too hard on yourself. I've been paying really good attention, and I work in this space with Noah a little bit, but this is not an easy question in my mind.
Yeah, it's not. It was a tricky one the way I formulated it too. So those who answered C and D are essentially correct. C is the correct answer, and actually D is technically incorrect now because the name of the standard has changed to system and organization controls. The AICPA loves to make tiny little changes that make all of our lives very confusing. So thank you, AICPA. All right, very short on time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I also want to get to some of the more meaty content here on the blockchain stuff. So I've told you that these are the 5 trust service principles. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through these. This is actually, the slide I'm showing now is a detailed breakdown of all those criteria that I talked about that make up each of these trust service principles. And disclaimer, these are the 2016. The way I'm showing them, I'm showing this as the old standard. All of these things still apply in the latest version, but I think that this is a much easier way to digest them. So, there's a lot of things that I wanted to talk about here, but again, short on time. I think one of the interesting points for crypto and blockchain companies will be in this security component. We're talking about the AICPA's definition of security, and that includes organizational controls and also risk assessment and management controls. These are things that startup companies in technology generally struggle with because they are moving so fast on their product, they forget to put in basic organizational controls and basic risk assessment cadences. And that's definitely going to be true with these projects and some of the startup / blockchain projects. All of these are essentially in play but depending on, again, the use case or the specific blockchain product that we're talking about. So I mentioned there were some changes. There's a lot of meat here. We could do a whole hour and still be short on time if we're talking about just changes to SOC 2, but it has been aligned with the COSO 2013 framework. And the reason that this happened was to align this SOC standard with public company reporting, because there are many public companies that are also service organizations that also need to issue SOC reports. So the idea was to align these two things. COSO is made up of 5 big elements that can cover the control environment, risk assessment, all of the control activities specific to the business, and then information communication and how the business actually monitors all of those control activities. So they're broken down into 17 principles, which I didn't plan to read to you anyway, and definitely can't now, and 87 points of focus. And those points of focus aren't mandatory, but they're just guidance points for management. So now the auditor and management have much more to work with in terms of these points of focus. So I think it's actually some good clarity for the audit. I'll provide all of this after as well, and there's more information on the change in the standard in the appendix for those of you that really want to earn your CPE credit. You can dig in deep there. So this is an overview of what really is included in a SOC report, and I'm just going to skip through it for now. But it's essentially these 5 main sections, 4 main sections, and sometimes a 5th.
And ultimately the deliverable then, Noah, at the end of this process is fairly detailed report.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's not like an ISO certification where it's literally a stamp of approval on one piece of paper. It's a certificate. This is a detailed report with section 3 being a full description, in paragraph form of the business, the product, all of the controls that go into maintaining that environment or product, and then a detailed testing table of all the controls, how they were tested, and what the results were in section 4. So a lot of these reports are, 100 pages or more.
And typically then they get shared with customers of that organization,
Yep.
maybe board members, officers, et cetera.
Absolutely. Customers and customers auditors, regulators, to the extent they're in a regulated industry.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a breakdown of sort of the main players in the current crypto and blockchain ecosystem. You've got your centralized exchanges, your Coinbase, your Kraken, your Binance, and you've got payment processors on the back end who are starting to facilitate some of crypto payment solutions. You've got custodial wallet providers. These are companies that offer wallet solutions, essentially a way to hold your crypto. You've got custodians who are playing a big role in tokenization. They're holding assets, maybe for a stable coin. They're actually holding the dollars that back that stable coin. You've got managed platform providers. This is your AWS and Microsoft Azure. You've got miners and mining pools. You've got decentralized apps and projects. These are startup companies that are out there doing the ICO or an STO, developing a new solution. Tokenizers. These are the issuers and I guess the platforms that facilitate the issuance of security tokens. And then you've got a whole range of ERP solutions, back office accounting, data aggregation providers, things like that. So tools, essentially. And for each of these, there's really unique risks that are at play. And I can't believe it. We're really probably not going to get to our use cases here, but we can do, well, a quick preview. I'm going to use the 2 minutes to talk about asset tokenization, which is a really interesting space. If you guys are all crypto curious at all, start looking into asset tokenization because this is already happening, but it's really nascent, and this is kind of the future that's going to happen in a lot of different industries. So what I did is I took the 5 trust service principles and just put in basically how would this apply to a security token platform. Again, this is going to be a software as a service in some ways, where an issuer can come and issue a security, but they're going to do it wrapped in a token. So governance and change management for those platforms is going to be very important. Obviously, availability is important. They're going to be relying on a blockchain in some ways, but really they're going to be hosting their own systems and managing all the subscribers and cap tables and all of these things within their platform. So availability is very important. Confidentiality, certainly. These tokenized asset platforms and the way that this is happening is not completely transparent on all blockchains. It's going to be, a lot of it is confidential. Processing integrity certainly can be in play because a lot of these systems will rely on smart contracts. And lastly, privacy. These organizations will not be immune from privacy regulation generally, but also their customers, issuers, investors may demand assurance on privacy as well. And so, yeah, with that, I'm sad to say we didn't get to our last 2 use cases, but I appreciate everybody joining. Love to hear from you after the webinar. If you have any questions we can answer, we'd be more than happy to do it. And again, we'll share this deck and the recording after. So if you'd like to revisit any of the more detailed content in the appendix, you're welcome to do so. And yeah, from the Armanino blockchain team.
I guess with that, we got our last polling question open. We want to make sure you get your CPE credit. So please make sure you respond. One of the questions that we got, Noah, was around kind of the logistics of this process and how it compares to a financial statement audit. I think if you've gone through a financial statement audit, that could take weeks, months sometimes, can take quite a burden on CFO and their team. How does this stack up compared to the involvement and just logistically how much time gets consumed in this process?
Great question. I'd like to say it's completely different, and it's very easy, but it's not. It is an audit. A buyer or an organization going through this should expect that they need to dedicate time to this, and they need to dedicate resources. It'll usually be your information security team or a compliance manager that's doing, or lead engineer. A lot of times will be involved, as opposed to a CFO and a controller. But yes, they need to be involved. Typically, a process will run over 2 to 3 months, depending, from issuance of the actual request to the auditor allowing you to respond and assess some of the evidence that comes in. And then a field work period where, there's some walkthroughs of and wrap up of those evidence requests. And then there's a period where the auditor needs to do all their documentation, go through their peer reviews, wrap up their binder, and eventually issue you a report.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for attending. And I think that, on that last question, it was all of the above. So all of those people could absolutely benefit from getting access to a SOC report. So thanks for calling in today. We'd be happy to follow up if you have any additional questions. Thanks.